Hi, this is Bob Nisbet with Paxton Hoag in Portland, Oregon, September 28, 2021. And this is an interview mostly about his Oregon Country Fair history. So are you a native Oregonian?
No, I was born on the East Coast, but my parents came here and moved to Astoria in the third grade. And so I've lived in Astoria most of my life. And one of the things when we had our 200th anniversary at 2011, I realized I had lived in Astoria a quarter of its history.
Wow.
So that was fun.
Okay. Well, tell me about your first fair, the Renaissance Fair in November '69. Were you living in Eugene?
I came down to go to Lane Community College and was actually living in Goshen, south of Eugene. And I saw a poster for doing a Renaissance Fair. Do you want to help organize a Renaissance Fair? So I went to a meeting at the Ulrichs, who were kind of organizing it. It was a fundraiser for a children's school in Eugene, and I went to one of their organizing meetings, and then showed up for a work party, helped with building a bridge across a little creek to get to the stage, and then came back as an attendee. It was pretty interesting. We had about 1,000 people a day at the very, very first one.
And you have pictures from that first fair?
Yes, I have my camera, and I have the only set of color pictures I've actually seen of the event.
Uh-huh. So what about the other early fairs it was out at Crow Road for a time or two, and then out in Veneta?
Only Crow went once. That was the spring of 1970. And that is actually the only fair I have missed.
Oh.
I've made all of the ones on our current site. But I missed that one at that time. And the first one I went to was actually the fall of 1970, when the Wootens, Bill and Cindy Wooten, had found the site that we currently use, and were able to rent that in the fall of 1970. We didn't have parking down below. We parked in what is Doug's Green up off of Subtle, and walked in Chickadee, which at that time was kind of a cat road. It had ruts in the center and stuff like that. That was the only way to get into the fair in the fall of '70. It was before the 8 was laid out. And then in the spring of 1971, I did, along with the Kassler family, who I was living with, copper enameling on Strawberry Lane. We were one of the very first booths on Strawberry Lane. And when they opened it up, that bottom part of the 8. We did not do very well as a craft booth. I think we sold $50 worth of stuff for the entire weekend, and we all decided that we like to cook. Food booths made money, so our next iteration was probably going to be a food booth. As an interesting aside, where our booth was, there is still a elderberry tree there. That tree was next to our booth. In front of our booth at that time was a road, and then another booth, and then camping beyond that. So I figure we've lost 30, 40 feet of bank in that area over the time period from 1970, when I had my booth in that area. I then went on to, in '72, we did a Chow Fun in Energy Park. They had beer garden there earlier, and they wanted to change that energy, and so they put us as a food booth in the back, along with other demonstration booths. And it was the Kassler family again, working half and half with the Patsy Mink for President campaign, trying to recoup some of their campaign money that we'd spent on the presidential campaign that year in 1972. And it was a Hawaiian pork and noodle dish, which was actually quite successful. And then Bill and Cindy liked the way we did it. They offered us a prime space up at the very entrance of the fair, bus entrance, which is now bus entrance, but that time was the main entrance. And it is what is now Phoenix Rising. They wanted us to, they offered it to us as long as we would do 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunches, and dinners, as kind of an alternative to main camp kitchen. And so we committed to that and started doing that. The first year, the booth was really a ramshackle pile of wood, and we brought in 200 fire brick and built a stove, put on a $20 grill top, rented another $20 grill from the gas company, and fired it with charcoal. Went out to Kingsford, and Kingsford gave us 800 pounds of charcoal. And that was our food booth the first year. In the fall of 70, that was 1973. In the fall of 1973, they leased the site to the Boy Scouts for a jamboree. When we came back and in 1974, the organizing group, most of the fair family are political. We worked in political campaigns in the 60s. We were pretty active people at that time. And we had all worked on the Wayne Morse for President campaign in 74, not president, Wayne Morse for Senator campaign in 1974. And when he lost, it was very, very disillusioned to us. So we didn't do a fair in the spring of 1974. By the fall, going into summer, into fall, we felt we needed one, as we continue to do. And so that was one of the very first fall fairs, or I think the third fall fair. We came back and found our 200 fire brick in little circles out in Miss Piggy's, and the Boy Scouts had burnt down half the booth. Oof. So it did look like firewood, I must admit. And so we had a work party came down and built the beginning of what is now the Phoenix Rising booth, the corner posts and things like that. And Helenita, my partner at the time, and one of the head of the Castner clan, named it Phoenix Rising, the Phoenix Rising from the ashes of the Boy Scouts. So that's a fun story of the start of Phoenix Rising.
So I don't have much of your history from the 70s and 80s. Can you kind of, were you an organizer? Were you a booth person?
I was a booth person. And from the rest of the 70s, I pretty much ran Phoenix Rising as a food booth. Again, breakfast, lunches, and dinners. We were one of the first groups to really start doing lunches. Now they pretty much do cookies and breakfast. That's what they're known for. One of the originals that worked in the booth developed the cookie recipes, and when I left the booth, he continued on and developed the cookie booth that is currently now. Now they're fourth generations away, and they're their own nonprofit, and they donate their money they make to other nonprofits like food banks, and they help start the Huranols at the fair with a grant for that. It was difficult to run a food booth out of Astoria. In the 76, 77, we brought in an 8-holer Army cook stove to work on, because that's really what we needed to produce on it, the food with. We'd grown that much. And in 78, I kind of burned out. I was doing all of the town runs, and it was disheartening to go get into town to get something and then immediately come back, navigate the traffic, turn around and have to go back to town, and I gave up the food booth. So in 79, a friend of mine got me a pass through his craft booth up by main stage. The booth was called Rock, and Dick Grasmick got me a pass. And at that point in time, I had met Helenita. I'm not Helenita Lois, who was my current partner for 37 years. And we got together at the 79 fair in that booth, and we're partners for 37 years. it, I kind of joined that booth for several years until Dick forgot to register it one year, missed the deadline, lost the booth. It became Mira's Reflections, and who turned out to be also a friend of ours. So we just stayed and were able to live there. And that was kind of the early 80s. The 83 fair was one of the most interesting ones that we've ever had, because that was called the Year of the Mud.
Right, right.
I was walking in with our camping gear Thursday night, looking at huge mud puddles in the path, wondering, how are we going to put on a fair? You know, I was, at that time, a vendor in the craft booth. I actually wasn't selling things, I was just a support person. And, but everybody was dismayed. And come the next morning, well, it turned out that the staff, Robert Despain, had pulled the staff together and said that we need to do something. And in the morning dawn, the booth people were out there emptying the puddles, and then here come with some of the, I saw pie plates, you know, emptying puddles that were later going to be sold. But then along comes the site trucks, and the first one had a pump, and they pumped all of the mud puddles dry out into the woods, and right nearby. And then the next truck came through with site crew again with shovels, and they actually shoveled the mud, the loose mud, into the trucks. And then the next set of trucks was trucks with hay bales, and they laid down straw the entire, from the front gate all the way to out Watergate. They were leaving Watergate as the 11 o'clock the gates opened and in the morning. So 83 was one of our most memorable years.
Yeah, I've heard about that, the flood there that year, So continuing on to the 80s, a booth person?
Yes, well, yes, I joined kind of another organization in 85. Friends of Bagby Hot Springs, and we were silk screening T-shirts to make money to rebuild the old bathhouse at Bagby. And so we were able to get in because we were making our own T-shirts and selling them. We were able to get in as a crafter. And for 85 and 86, I did Friends of and 87, I did Friends of Bagby Hot Springs. In 87, since we really weren't a crafter, you know, we were more of a nonprofit fundraiser, which didn't really fit. They shuffled us into Energy Park as a hot springs section, and then kind of shuffled us out of the fair as typical of, you know, we really didn't fit at that time of the standard model of what the fair booths were. So I was left dangling and looking for a way in. A friend of mine got me a pass in 88, and then in 89, Lois and I came back from traveling. I think we'd been gone for like 3 months in Central America, and I was looking for a job and wandering around main camp asking what is there to do. At that point, people didn't know who I was. I was, you know, a booth person, that kind of thing. And so I got sent up to water camp where they were putting in the new water system. And I've done plumbing in the past. And one of the things that's different, the water system was built by construction, Oregon Country Fair Construction. They're carpenters. Every joint in the pump house leaked. And so Alan and I took upon ourselves to recut all of the pipe in the pump house, starting in one corner, because you shrink pipe to fit. It doesn't line up. And so you cut one piece, fit another one, cut another one, fit another one. So it's a fairly complicated system. And we ended up getting this whole system up and running. They'd already laid the pipe through and built the reservoir. This was up at the head end pump house. And we got it up and running, I think, midnight, Thursday night, Friday morning, and just right before the fair opened. And the system ran perfectly through the fair. It was our first water system. So, and that I got my pass that time from construction. Charles, after all the work, Charles Drew handed me my pass as he was head of construction, or one of the coordinators at the time. And so the next year, we went traveling to Fiji. I think we were gone 3 months in Fiji, and then came back to the fair. We liked traveling in other world countries and then coming to the fair, because it's kind of like a third world country in its own right. It's a whole lot less culture shock when you come to the fair and then go home. And so I found I had a job on plumbing, which I had been looking for on the water crew as a plumber. So the next few years I worked doing plumbing at the fair.
So there was a recall of the board of directors in 1991, and that coincided with your getting involved with the board?
Yes, I was not actually involved in the management or that kind of the fair at all at that time. I had to actually go back and read the minutes to find out why there was a recall. And in a sense, because there was a real split in the board of directors and they couldn't agree on anything, and the split went on for a couple of years, and finally the membership got tired and filed an initiative petition to recall the board of directors. In that time, 1991, there were 10 of us elected to the board, new people elected to the board. It was a total transition in the organization. And a move towards, I think, a much more responsible board to try and get things done. I think I was 9th or 10th of those in there that, when I came in, people went, "Where did you come from?" Well, I've been here forever, but I'm a booth person. Most of the time, like booth people, we avoid management. So it was I was novel, but I had the support of water crew and traffic crew, because I had quite a number of friends in traffic, and so that's I think what rode me into the position. Then people like my work. For many of the years I've been on the board, I've been one of the top vote getters in the vote count, which is an honor and kind of humbling, but I really try to do the best I can for the fair. I actually think all of the board does what they think is best for the fair. And like everywhere else, we have a wide diversity of opinions. Going back to 1991, at that point, we're a totally new board. We had, just were trying to figure out what we were doing. We then, at that point, we were with previously Arna Shaw had been hired as general manager. And so we decided to keep her on because we needed continuity, And so we put her on as general manager for another year. And then at the end of the year, we went looking for somebody, in a sense, with more community experience. And we hired Leslie Scott, who came out of Community Village. And basically her was a community organizer and community building person on a resume, and looked like she had the qualifications to do the job. And so we hired her as general manager, and she went on to the first 2 years, as anything in the fair, were very controversial. They didn't like the way she did the job. It wasn't the same thing. Should be an all-volunteer organization, you know. But she really, by doing a good job and really studying and working with all the crews and working with the community, she really built the fair into a solid organization. In my opinion, her tenure, she got rid of a lot of the petty corruption that kind of went through the fair with food vouchers and passes and stuff like this. She really worked hard on getting rid of that. She also really established us in the Veneta community and made, you know, neighborhood response team really worked on solving neighborhood problems and worked on integrating us in. I view Leslie as really bringing us into maturity, giving us a good budget, good financial setup, really developing responsible crew structures, you know, and developing a very good fair. She supported the crews immensely, and so anyway, let's see. That's kind of that story there. Right. In '91, I was on the board from '91 to '98. I kind of felt that term limit. I believed at that time in term limits. And that, in retrospect, in my opinion, is a mistake. Term limits is a mistake. If you don't do your job, the clientele, you know, the members can vote you out. I think that's the best way of viewing it. But I did, and so I spent 7 years off the board at that time. I was still active in the fair and still doing, actually as part of the recall, in 93, 92, 93, we developed photo ID. There was a move. One of our first things Leslie did was really work us with a partnership with Reggae on the River in Northern California. Doug Green came into our lives as a wonderful backup manager and partner with the fair, and he was involved with Reggae on the River, and we did some cultural interchanges back and forth, where we went down. Some of our people went down and gave them advice, and some of them came up and helped us. We adopted wristbands at that time from them. And because pass shuffling was extremely problematic, and so there was a large, as typical of any organization, contingent. You're going to wristband me over my dead body, you know. I'm not going to get wristbanded. You know, you're just not going to do this. And so we developed photo ID as a alternative ID for those people that didn't want to get wristbanded. Right. And I ran that crew for 15 years up until the mid 2000s, and developed the whole system of how we do it. It has turned into an ID for actually management and the coordinators and people like that, so people know who they are and where people go and things like that. So it's become a very valuable part of the fair. Besides, I also designed it to pay for itself when I started the whole program, and it has done that.
So was your partner Lois, did she work at the photo ID booth, or anybody else in your family?
Well, Connor, one of Lois's grandkids, currently works in photo ID. But no, at that point I really tried to talk Lois into getting a job. Oh. What she did was join the wristband crew. Oh. And went out and wristbanded people like Traffic Camp, which were all friends, and then Whitebird, you know, which she became friends with. She was a wonderful organizer for that, and she spent many, many years on wristband crew, you know, particularly going out in specials, where you have to go out and wristband a few people because they're on the job and they, you know, can't really get to the registration. So, but her daughter, Margot, works in childcare and has 20 years. I think worked in child care for 20 years. Early on, when I first got on the board, I realized that I'm voting on the budget. I know which crew gets more money. So I started sending my friends to those crews to ask if they could join the crew, particularly if their skills matched. And that's how I think how Margot got on childcare, because she was doing childcare at that time. So, and as I say, now she's done 20 years, and I think she's retired and now an elder.
So you've been mostly on the board in say from 2005 to the present, not all the time, but most of the time?
No, it was 1991 when I got elected. I did 7 years.
Right.
Then I did 7 years off.
Right.
And then I got elected in 2005
Right.
and did 10 years,
10 years.
basically. And then retired to take care of Lois, my partner, who was at that time having injuries and health problems. So she became my most important thing to do in the life.
Right.
And then when she passed, she encouraged me to get back involved in the fair, because that's a good way to get past grief and keep yourself busy. So
Right.
I was 2 years off, and now I'm I'm running for my third term of the third time.
Okay.
There is an interesting bit of that. I've realized that I've been on and off the board for half of the fair's history. And if you count all the years I've been on the board, it has been a third of the fair history. And so I can understand why some people, consider that too long and too much involvement. But I have the best interest of the fair at heart, and my goal is really to leave the fair in a condition that the young people will be ready to take it over and move it on to the next 50 years, because it's going to continue on. We're not necessarily going to be around here much longer. And I love the youth that we attract. I have, when I was doing photo ID, I had one young lady that was assigned to me by Team Crew. She stuck around for cleanup, way beyond when her shift was over. And so when she graduated from Team Crew, I gave her a job. Then I found out she'd got her own way on Team Crew. Later, she brought her mother in and got her a job on info booths. And that taught me that as long as we maintain our culture and be authentic about what we're at, we will attract the right kind of young people. Now, they're often busy and they don't have time to get involved in management, but if we can support them and develop their skills, they will go on, they will be the ones that's going to take the fair on into the future. And I really like that, I want to see that happen.
So, on a different line of questioning, what are some of your favorite acts at the fair over the years?
I love the family du Carniveau. It's they are some of the most creative people. The vaudevillians, all of them in general. I miss Reverend Chumley and his ascorbic wit. And I love the Karamatsas. Some of the music it exposes me to music I would never have probably listened to, and I've really, really enjoyed it. One of my favorite things is the variety that we end up with at the midnight show. I think it's a world-class entertainment that you just don't get anywhere else in the world. We have such it's the variety, I guess, is one of the things that I like about it the best. I hadn't thought of it that way. Ambience. One of the reasons I've studied the polls, exit polls, then we have done exit polls at the fair, and one of the things that most of the people come for, it's not the stages, it's not food, it's not crafts, it's actually the ambience. Each of those generate 15 to 17% of the people. Those are the reasons why people come. 52% of the people just come for the ambience. And that is us. That is us being creative. And that's one of the things we really, really need to continue to figure out. And that's kind of what we're doing in a transition now, is trying to figure out how we can still be us as volunteers and creative, but yet be a legal 501c3 that's responsible to the state and the community that we live in. It's always been a dichotomy of the fair, and I think we're figuring it out.
So I understand that you love the setup and tear down after the fair.
My favorite is building something. I've been involved in a number of nonprofits, but most of the time in the initial startup phase, where you're writing bylaws and getting the organization together. And then once it gets going, I kind of hand it off to somebody else to run it. I did that with KMUN in Astoria, our community radio station. And in a sense, I helped shepherd KOCF through the board process while I was on the board, which was one of the most difficult things I've ever done, because it was always 7-3 votes, and if we didn't get 7, we were dead. So it was touch and go. But anyway, I like building an event and watching it come together. I do time-lapse photography, and I try and do time lapses of it coming together and then time lapses of it going apart. My favorite part is post, though, because every day is less and less people. And the ghosts are still there. You could see the stuff on the shelves, but it's not there. You can see where everybody camped, but it's not there. For probably good, I bet close to 20 years now, I study how we camp on the land. It's one of my most important observations that I feel that I do every year. And with the 2 days, Tuesday and Wednesday, after the fair, you could see where every tent was. And I have a route where I count how many tents have camped in this area. Has it changed? Has it not? And I find it hasn't much. And anyway, it's enlightening to me to study how we camp. And those are the only 2 days you can see the after effects. So that's one of the reasons I really, really like post, is those 2 days. Watching decon do deconstruction, it took us 2 months to build it. It takes us a week to take it apart and put it away. And those are favorite things I like to time-lapse. So like building the bridges, I put a time-lapse camera on it, and taking it down, I'll put a time-lapse camera on it, things like this. Deconning Daredevil, what used to be Daredevil stage, now Ducanovo, is a fascinating project, which is a group project where construction comes in and then they take it apart and move it piece by piece up and onto by hand, up and onto a truck.
And why does it take 2 months to set up and 1 week to tear down?
Just a lot of building.
Yeah.
I mean, we flood in the winter, so everything moves around. Truck trees fall over. You can't get into the site really with heavy equipment till May.
Right.
And so it's just,
Very involved.
It's very involved. There's a lot of work to do. We live basically kind of in a floodplain. And so it changes every year drastically. And tree crew has been working right now, removing some of the trees that came down from last winter, and we will have more, I think, come down this next winter. Depends how much rain we get. But I just like the less and less people. Then one of the last things I do is go out, as I'm leaving the fair site on usually Saturday, a week after the fair, I drive out to the labyrinth and walk the labyrinth. It's kind of a last honorific of the fair.
Right. So were you involved in starting the Elders?
Yes. That was in about 2001, 2002. That grew out of a discussion in both evaluations and, the need for the fact that we were all growing older and that we needed a program of making it, in a sense, easier on us, maybe work share or things like this. And Actually, I wasn't on the board when the suggestion happened. That was came out. There was a motion made to develop an elder program using the formula age plus years of service equals 75. And that didn't pass, but it gave us a starting point for talking and working. And so a committee kind of was formed to develop how elder system would work, and I was one of the very first members of that, among the very first members. And we met together and, trying to work it out. A lot of my thinking had been, I was going back and forth to meetings from Eugene. So I'm sitting there driving up the freeway figuring out, do we need to worry about this? What happens here? How do we certify an elder has been there for so many years? Does the formula really work? And I came to the realization the formula didn't work. I took a friend, one of my grandkids, actually, adopted grandkids, Helenita's daughter, Phoebe. She started work at the fair at age 9, driving water truck. Keeping records for her mom, who was the coordinator. She could have retired under that formula at age 45. So it was apparent the formula was not going to work. And so after many, many years of committee meetings, and one I even attended from Fiji, I had to be at the meeting a day ahead of time because I was over the time zone, the international date line. But I used an ISDN connection, the first time I ever used kind of that thing, and actually attended an elder committee meeting from Fiji in 2002. And then we worked on it, developed the program and passed it, and it has grown larger than I expected. When we were developing, I kind of thought elders would taper down at about 800 to 1,000. But I was wrong. There's a lot more of us around than we figured out. And I think we're up to about almost 1,500 or 1,600 registered elders. Now that means they aren't, many of them are still working their job. In fact, about half of them are still working their job. About half of them have kind of retired and yet still come to the fair.
And when I became an elder, the standard was at least 55 years old with 20 years of service?
Yes, that is still the current standard.
Okay.
And we are actually just starting to talk about that. Hillary came to the Elders Committee the other day. We're tackling population growth, a problem we've needed to deal with at the fair, and we haven't. And so at the last board meeting, this is September of 2021, we adopted a motion to set a limit of 35,000 people on the site at any given time. And from my own personal observations, I think that's a pretty close estimate of capacity and what we can do. We were, I think, up to about 50,000, no, let's see, 20. We were about 39,000 at our peak on 2019, our 50th anniversary. And that stressed every crew. Recycling did not have enough people to deal with the load of it. Water had real trouble delivering enough water. And so we're taking an inventory of things like our water system, just how much can it support, and looking at things like this and trying to develop some sort of criteria of just how do we handle our population growth and how can we grow. We know we have to do some sort of limited growth just because we've got another generation coming up. When we were doing it in 1969, there was, just a few hundred of us in reality. And now we're fourth generation and have kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, and they're all working the fair.
Right.
So, I'm happy about that. I love it. I think our multi-generational event is what makes us us.
So the last couple of years, the fair has gone virtual due to COVID. And what's that has changed your involvement to some extent, putting on the virtual fair.
It was interesting, very interesting to me. I helped with the steering committee for the last 2 years of the virtual fair, partly because of my role as co-coordinator of video crew now, which is what I do now, and I have access to all the video archives of the fair, and in particular the 2020 virtual fair, we relied heavily on recorded footage that we had from all sorts of sources. And assembled a really tight virtual fair that we streamed, and was quite successful for its time. Again, 2020, we were in desperate straits for finances to maintain the organization. We don't have a fair. We don't really have other sources of income. And so the virtual fair and its commemorative sales that were attached to it really contributed substantially to the success of the fair through 2020 until the federal grants, Payroll Protection Act, and other things kind of took effect. So it was also a lesson that, we're a multimedia event. The fair is a multimedia event. We should, in my own opinion, this is my opinion, because our history is that we don't do this, but I think we need to change. I think we need to stream more and more of our entertainment. So it also lessens, I think, the crowds on the paths and things like that. It also expands our audience, and I think it can expand our entertainer audience, particularly our vaudevillians. I think we need to figure out how to do that. And so my goal coming up in the future is to kind of take video crew and turn it into a streaming support group where, and I'm really looking forward to starting that this next year. So we really learned how to do it. We've learned the software, we kind of developed the hardware. The second year, 2021, we did much more entertainment. We're able to really do live entertainment and switch from places, remote places to live places and back and forth. And it came across really good. I want to show the whole 2021 stream again because we have it recorded. And they're like 3-4 streams. We had workshops, and some of those workshops I was able to tune in only for a few moments, but they really were interesting. There was a workshop on the history of the land that I think may have used some of your stuff from the past, but it was fascinating, from the, again, original people that were for doing the work. And then Zach did his human intervention training, and it was the first time I've seen it online that I thought was really valuable. So I think we're going to continue some of the features of the virtual fair. We all want to be there in person. I mean, the virtual fair is just not us. A large percentage of our people went camping. Some people did stream it in their backyard, set up their little fair, set up in the backyard and watch the event there, which I thought was nice.
You were on a camera at the Wow Hall?
Yeah, for a while.
Yeah, for a while.
Yeah.
And the video crew would be live streaming in the future if you had your plan? During the
Yes,
fair?
yes. Yeah, well, yes, I think we have wonderful entertainment and such a wide variety of stages. I think it would be easy to do. Spoken word stuff could be really interesting to stream, right. Like our discussion groups.
Right.
I mean, in this last year, we've used recordings of those, but it'd be so much fun to stream the live stuff,
right.
And that's kind of my goal, is to move us into that. I also think that can be a future income generating source. We all have to think of, at least those of us on the board, have to think of, it's all wonderful and fun to do things. You got to pay for them.
So on a non-fair topic, I've seen some of your, from Facebook or YouTube, you've gone to Mexico, perhaps Cuba. What are some of your favorite places to travel?
Well, I want to go back to Cuba really a lot, but I don't feel like traveling now. Cuba was very interesting. Lois had been there for the 20th anniversary of the revolution, 79, right before she got together with me. And then we went back on like the 50th anniversary of the revolution. And it was really interesting to look and see the changes that had happened, how things had actually progressed in the country. And there's a wonderful move towards more movement towards capitalism, but in my view, responsible capitalism. Cuba has a tremendous history of corruption that was fostered by the U.S. government and the mobs. And so the revolution is just was just taking back control of their own country. Now they've done it in their own way, and it's interesting. Their health care is exceptional. Free health care for all of their people, free education, housing subsidized food. But that they have tremendous economic problems with their currency, which they're solving. And I'd love to go back and see that. Most of Lois's really was interested in Central America. During the 80s, she volunteered with a Witness for Peace and went to refugee camps at least twice a year as an observer. On the Honduran border, on the Guatemalan border, and Mexican border with Guatemala. She was shelled in Nicaragua by U.S. troops once, or U.S. supported troops once. So I would then, when she got done with her kind of tour of duty type stuff, I would go down and join her, and then we'd travel around Guatemala. And she loves the people in Guatemala. They're wonderful people. It's 95% indigenous culture, and they still live their culture a lot, though it's been traumatized by Americans. And we were down there during those times in 82 and 83, when it was extremely dangerous to travel around the country. But the people are wonderful and supportive. We have friends that have moved down there, so we go visit. Lois traded sons with friends in Antigua, Guatemala. When she went to language school down there, she lived with a family and made friends with them. Their son came up and stayed in Astoria for a summer, and Kirk, one of Lois's sons, went down there and stayed there for the summer. Eye-opening to both of them. International travel does that. We also went to Fiji twice. We like to go for long periods of time, like 2 or 3 months when we were doing that. I couldn't do that when I was working on the on the board. Most of those trips were like 5 weeks, because I only wanted to miss one board meeting a year, if that. But Fiji, we went there twice, and that was really very interesting. I would go back there again. Again, it's a native culture that's able to maintain their culture on their land, which is very, very unusual in the world. The early Fijians, when they realized they were going to be eaten up by a colonial power, they adopted for British protectorate. The first British protectorate made 2 edicts, which are so unique in the world. One, you couldn't take the natives' land. So the Fijians, the Council of Chiefs, still own 85% of the country. And their culture is to share and share alike. So they have no incentive to be business people. They still live a village life. And then the other ruling was that you couldn't use the natives as indentured servants, i.e. slaves. And that meant they still have their culture. When I was there, last time we were there was 2002. At that time, they were not spoiled at all by television. They did not watch television. They would sit and sing songs in the evening, tell stories as a cultural thing. I mean, the whole village kind of would do it. Or where we were on a youth camp kind of thing, the whole camp did it. And drink kava. They have an indigenous drug culture they do not recognize as a drug culture, but you drink kava to do anything. You go buy a computer, you sit in the back and drink kava, a bowl of kava, you're deciding what you're going to buy. You go to the National Museum, you're greeted by a Fijian in full regalia, offering you a bowl of kava. And the little Thangalai, the little resort we stayed at, which was on a Methodist youth camp, but had being not run as a Christian camp, but very responsibly. 3 meals a day, a little beret on a sandy palm tree island with a reef that extended about 3 times its size, $17 a day. And what we do is sit there. They had their own little house band, and we'd sit around and sing songs and drink coffee. It was an interesting culture. The second time we went back there, it was managed actually by one of the local villages, and did the same thing. You know, very cheap, very nice place, fun, friendly people. In traveling, we've asked people where their favorite place is, and invariably it's Thailand or Fiji. We never made it to Thailand, but we did like Fiji. Central America is probably the favorite.
So one last question about the fair is what would you like to say to the Fair family?
I'm going to say something that I've been saying a lot lately, and it's somewhat controversial. I've been yelled at for saying it at Elders. It's time that the fair. Let me go back a little bit. I think, as I mentioned, Leslie brought us into maturity. Charlie Ruff, when he managed the fair, he brought us into legality. Our history is of doing things and asking for forgiveness later. It doesn't work in today's culture, particularly with so many cameras and so many cell phones and so many people watching. You just can't do that. So what I've been saying is we cannot be a pirate anymore, a pirate organization anymore. We are a recognized, responsible 501c3 in the state of Oregon, and we have to behave that way. We can play pirate all we want, but we cannot be a pirate. And that is a cultural change that's kind of hard for us to recognize. But I think we're pretty good at playing pirate, and I think we can continue to do that. We will do it. You know, it's just we have to follow the laws when we're doing it. You know. And then, as I say, that's kind of where I'm going. The young people like it. We also need to look and support our young people in the fair and make sure that they have a good time, that they want to come back, and find ways for them to be involved, because they're going to take over. I've watched Pre-Fair Kitchen Crew, which is one of our younger crew, but they work their rear ends off, and they are a true fair family. They're amazing people, you know. And it's the same way with most of the other crews. I really appreciate the amount of work and the energy and fun that goes into our organization. The whole key, one of the things our one of the things our evaluation meetings after the fair really identified is having fun is one of the most important parts of the fair. I really believe in the 3-chip interaction, get the work done, treat each other with respect, and have fun. And that's what we learned from Zach and his human intervention training. And I think those are some of the most valuable things that we can carry forward to us and in our life. So that's the message I'd say. Have fun, be responsible, get the job done.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you, Paxton.
Thank you very much, Bob. Really appreciate it.